James Walker drummed his fingers on the polished mahogany desk, his jaw tight as he listened to his grandfather's demands over the phone. The old man's voice was firm despite his age, delivering an ultimatum that made James's blood run cold. "I want to see you settle before I die, James. Bring a wife to my birthday celebration or I'll reconsider your position in my will." The line went dead before James could argue. He tossed his phone onto the desk and leaned back in his leather chair, loosening his tie with a frustrated tug. At 35, James had built his own fortune, but his grandfather still controlled significant family assets that would impact his business plans. 2 weeks, he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. How am I supposed to find a wife in 2 weeks? James called his household manager, Robert, to his office. The older man appeared within minutes, standing at attention as James paced the room. "I need a solution, Robert. My grandfather is demanding I bring a wife to his birthday weekend. It's impossible to find someone suitable in time." He stopped pacing and faced Robert directly. "What if someone from the staff could pose as my wife? Just for the weekend. I'd pay them generously, of course." Robert's expression remained professional, though his eyebrows raised slightly. "I'll see who might be available, sir." Unknown to both men, Lily Miller was just outside the door, having arrived to clean the office. She froze when she overheard their conversation, her hand clutching her cleaning supplies tightly. Lily had been working as a housekeeper in James's mansion for nearly a year, but he had barely noticed her. She was just another member of the staff that kept his life running smoothly while he built his empire. At 27, Lily had taken the second job at the mansion to help pay for her younger brother's medical treatments after he was diagnosed with a rare condition. Last week, her day job had cut her hours, leaving her desperate for money. The men's voices grew louder as they approached the door. Lily quickly moved away, pretending to dust a nearby vase when they emerged. "Consider it, Robert. Find someone suitable by tomorrow," James instructed before returning to his office and closing the door. Lily's heart raced as she formed a plan. This could be the answer to her prayers. The money from such an arrangement could cover her brother's treatments for months. That evening, after completing her duties, Lily gathered her courage and knocked on James' office door. She heard his deep voice giving permission to enter. James looked up from his computer, surprise crossing his handsome face when he saw her. "Yes, did Robert send you?" "No, sir," Lily replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I overheard your conversation earlier, about needing someone to pretend to be your wife." James' expression darkened. "You were eavesdropping?" "Not intentionally," Lily assured him, taking a step forward. "I was about to clean your office, but I'd like to volunteer for the position." James leaned back, studying her properly for the first time. She wasn't what he had in mind. No connections, no social polish, but there was something striking about her. Her simple uniform couldn't hide her natural beauty, and the determination in her eyes caught his attention. "Why would you want to do this?" he asked, suspicious. Lily took a deep breath. "I need the money. My brother is sick, and I recently lost hours at my other job. I'm a quick learner and I know how to be discreet." James stood and walked around his desk, circling Lily as if inspecting merchandise. "My family is old money, very traditional. They'd expect my wife to be refined, educated. Do you even know which fork to use for the salad course?" A flush crept up Lily's neck, but she held his gaze. "No, but I can learn." "In 2 weeks?" James questioned with a raised eyebrow. "Try me," she challenged. Something in her defiance amused him. His lips curved slightly. "What's your name?" "Lily Miller." "Well, Lily Miller," he said, returning to his desk and writing a figure on a piece of paper. He handed it to her. "That's what I'm willing to pay for a convincing performance." Lily looked at the number and nearly gasped. It was more than she made in 6 months. "If you can prove you can be trained to act the part," James continued, "the job is yours. But understand this, my family can't know the truth. This would be a business arrangement, nothing more." Lily nodded, hope blooming in her chest. "I understand completely, sir." "James," he corrected her, "if you're going to be my wife, you should at least use my first name." "James," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. Neither of them realized in that moment how this simple business arrangement would change everything between them. The next morning, Lily arrived at James's mansion not as a housekeeper, but as a student. James had arranged for a team of experts to transform her in just 2 weeks. She wore her best clothes, a simple blue dress that suddenly felt shabby in the grand entrance hall where a stern-looking woman waited. "This is Mrs. Bennet." James introduced the woman with perfect posture and critical eyes. "She'll teach you etiquette, speech, and how to carry yourself." Mrs. Bennet circled Lily, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We have much work to do, Mr. Walker." For the next 5 days, Lily's muscles ached from walking with books on her head, her throat hurt from repeating tongue twisters, and her brain swam with rules about which spoon to use and how to address a duke. Each night, she collapsed into bed in a small guest room James had provided, too tired even to call her brother. On the 6th day, James decided to check on her progress. He entered the dining room where Lily was practicing a formal dinner. He watched from the doorway, surprised by the change in her. She sat straight, her movements graceful as she handled the silverware correctly. "You are a quick study," he said, making her look up. "Thank you." Lily replied with a small, confident smile that caught him off guard. James sat across from her, studying her face. Without the housekeeper's uniform, with her hair styled simply but elegantly, she looked different. Beautiful, even. "Tell me about your brother," he said suddenly. Lily's eyes softened. "Tom is 22. He was studying to be an engineer when he got sick. He's the smartest person I know." James nodded, finding himself genuinely interested. "And your parents? They died in a car accident when I was 18. I've taken care of Tom since then." James felt an unexpected connection. "I lost my parents young too. My grandfather raised me and my sister." Lily looked at him with new understanding. Is that why his approval matters so much? The question was too personal, too insightful. James stood abruptly. "We should practice dancing. My family always dances at these events." Later that evening, in the mansion's ballroom, Lily stood nervously as James approached. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "Put your hand on my shoulder," he instructed, placing his hand on her waist. Lily's breath caught at his touch. They began moving to the soft music, awkwardly at first. She stepped on his foot and apologized quickly. "Relax," James said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "Let me lead." She looked up at him and nodded, allowing her body to follow his. Gradually, they found their rhythm, moving together around the empty ballroom. James was surprised by how natural it felt to hold her. "Your family will expect us to be comfortable with each other," he said, his voice low. "We need to act like we're in love." Lily swallowed hard. "How do we do that?" James pulled her closer, their bodies nearly touching. "Like this. Couples touch casually. They know each other's habits and preferences." His hand on her back felt warm, strong. Lily tried to focus on her steps, rather than the flutter in her stomach. "What's your favorite food?" she asked suddenly. James looked confused. "What? If I'm your wife, I should know your favorite food, and your favorite color, and whether you snore." A genuine laugh escaped him, transforming his face. Lily thought it might be the first real laugh she'd heard from him. "Pasta. Blue. And I've been told I do," occasionally he answered, surprising himself with his honesty. They continued dancing, asking each other simple questions. Favorite books, childhood memories, first pets. The formal dance lesson evolved into something more intimate, 2 people getting to know each other. When the music stopped, they stood still, hands still connected, closer than necessary. James looked down at Lily's face, her cheeks flushed from dancing, her eyes bright, and felt something shift inside him. "I think that's enough for tonight," he said, his voice rougher than intended. He stepped back, breaking the spell. That night, James sat in his office, unable to focus on work. Images of Lily dancing in his arms kept distracting him. This was dangerous territory. She was his employee. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. In her room, Lily touched her waist where his hand had been, replaying their dance in her mind. She reminded herself that this was all pretend, that in 2 weeks she would go back to being invisible to him. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. Neither of them slept well that night, both troubled by feelings they hadn't planned for and weren't ready to acknowledge. The day of departure arrived faster than either James or Lily expected. They loaded their luggage into James's sleek black car, an uncomfortable silence between them. Over the past week, they had practiced their story meticulously, but something had changed. Their interactions had become charged with an electricity neither was willing to acknowledge. Remember, we've been secretly dating for 8 months and got married 3 weeks ago in a private ceremony, James reminded her, his eyes fixed on the road. Lily nodded, fidgeting with the stunning diamond ring on her finger. It was on loan from a jeweler friend of James, real but temporary, just like their relationship. And we met when, she prompted, testing him. When you were working at a charity event I attended, James finished. I was immediately taken with your honesty and asked you to dinner. Lily smiled slightly, and I initially said no, but eventually gave in to my charm, James added, a rare playfulness in his voice. The 3-hour drive to his family's country estate gave them time to rehearse, but as they pulled through massive iron gates, Lily's confidence faltered. The estate was bigger than she had imagined, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and a lake that glittered in the afternoon sun. I don't belong here, she whispered. James surprised her by taking her hand. His palm was warm against hers. You'll be fine. Just stay close to me. The front door opened before they reached it. A distinguished older woman emerged, her silver hair elegantly styled, her posture perfect. That's my Aunt Patricia, James whispered quickly. She's kind but notices everything. Aunt Patricia embraced James warmly, then turned curious eyes to Lily. So this is the woman who finally captured my nephew's heart. Lily smiled nervously. It's lovely to meet you. Come in, dear. Everyone is dying to meet you. James placed his hand on the small of Lily's back, guiding her inside. His touch sent warmth spreading through her body. For a moment, she forgot this was pretend. The grand entrance hall was filled with family members, all elegantly dressed, all turning to stare at them. James greeted them confidently while Lily tried to remember names and relationships from their preparation. A tall, imposing older man approached, leaning on a cane. His eyes, the same deep blue as James's, examined Lily critically. Grandfather, James said, his voice subtly changing, this is Lily, my wife. Thomas Walker extended his hand and Lily took it, remembering to maintain eye contact as Mrs. Bennet had taught her. So you're the one who finally made my grandson settle down, he said, his voice deep and authoritative. I'm very lucky to have met him, Lily replied, surprising herself with how genuine the words felt. Thomas's stern expression softened slightly. We'll see about that. James has always been too caught up in work to appreciate what truly matters. James tensed beside her. Instinctively, Lily slipped her arm through his. He works hard, but he always makes time for what's important. James looked down at her, surprise in his eyes. She smiled up at him, the practiced adoring look feeling less and less like an act. Later, as they were shown to their room, a single room with one large bed, reality crashed back. The door closed, leaving them alone, and Lily stood awkwardly by the window. You were impressive downstairs, James said, loosening his tie. Grandfather seemed to like you. I just said what felt right, Lily replied softly. James moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the gardens below. This was my mother's favorite view. The roses below were hers. Lily was touched by this rare personal glimpse. She had good taste. They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching. James turned to face her, his expression unreadable. We have to share the bed tonight. The walls are thin, and my sister's room is next door. She'd find it strange if I slept on the couch. Lily's heart raced. Of course, it's part of the job. Right. The job. Something flashed in his eyes, something that made Lily's breath catch. The dinner bell rang, saving them from the moment. We should go down, James said. As they walked toward the door, he took her hand naturally. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a small gesture that felt startlingly intimate. Remember, he said, his voice low, tonight, everyone needs to believe we're in love. Lily looked up at him, suddenly unsure which parts were still pretend. I remember. They entered the dining room hand in hand, playing their parts perfectly while something real and unexpected bloomed between them in the spaces, where pretense ended and truth began. Dinner was a test of nerves for Lily. She sat beside James at the long table, surrounded by his family's wealth and tradition. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, making rainbows dance across white tablecloths. She remembered Mrs. Bennet's lessons, carefully using the correct silverware and sitting with perfect posture. James's hand occasionally brushed hers, each touch sending sparks through her body. When she glanced at him, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tell us how you two met," James's sister Kate asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "James has been so secretive about you." Lily began their rehearsed story, but James interrupted, taking her hand in his. "Lily was working at the Children's Hospital fundraiser last year. She spilled champagne on my shirt." This wasn't their practiced story. Lily looked at him in confusion. James continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "She was so embarrassed, but I found her honesty refreshing. Everyone else there was trying to impress me, but Lily just wanted to help me clean my shirt." His eyes met hers, and something in them made her heart skip. He was changing their story, making it more real somehow. "I asked her to dinner 6 times before she said yes," he added, a genuine smile playing on his lips. Lily found herself smiling back, caught in the moment. "I thought he was just being nice about the shirt." The family laughed, and Lily relaxed slightly, letting James lead their improvised tale. It felt more natural this way, less rehearsed. After dinner, the family moved to a large drawing room for drinks. James was pulled into a conversation with his grandfather, while Lily found herself alone by the fireplace. A beautiful woman in a tight red dress approached, her smile not reaching her eyes. "So you're James's mysterious bride," the woman said, her voice honey-sweet but cold. "I'm Rebecca. James and I dated for nearly 2 years." Lily's stomach tightened. James hadn't mentioned an ex-girlfriend would be here. "It's nice to meet you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Rebecca sipped her wine, watching Lily over the rim of her glass. "You're not his usual type. James always preferred women with connections, ambition, social standing." Each word was a perfectly aimed arrow. Lily forced a smile. "Perhaps that's why they were all just girlfriends and I'm his wife." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "A rather sudden marriage, wasn't it? No engagement announcement, no big wedding. Very unlike the James I know." Before Lily could respond, a man approached them. "Lily, right? I'm Michael, James's cousin. I work at his company." He smiled warmly, but his next words froze Lily's blood. "Have we met before? You look familiar." Panic fluttered in Lily's chest. Michael might have seen her cleaning at James's office. "I don't think so," she managed. "I could swear I've seen you somewhere," Michael insisted, studying her face. Rebecca watched this exchange with growing interest. "Perhaps at James's building? Do you work nearby?" "No," Lily said quickly. "I worked at the Children's Hospital before we got married." Michael snapped his fingers. "That must be it. I was there for a board meeting once." Lily nodded, relief washing over her, but Rebecca's expression had changed to one of suspicion. Across the room, James finished his conversation with his grandfather and looked for Lily. When he saw her cornered by Rebecca and Michael, his face darkened. He made his way to her side immediately, sliding an arm around her waist possessively. "I see you've met my wife," he said, his voice cool as he looked at Rebecca. Rebecca's smile was razor-sharp. "Yes, we were just getting acquainted. Such a whirlwind romance you two had." James pulled Lily closer. "When you know, you know." Later that night, alone in their room, the tension that had been building all evening finally burst. "You didn't tell me your ex-girlfriend would be here," Lily said, pacing the room in her nightgown. "She practically interrogated me." James loosened his tie angrily. "I didn't know my aunt would invite her." "And what about Michael? I saw him talking to you. Did he recognize you?" "He thought I looked familiar but believed me when I said I worked at the hospital," Lily replied. But Rebecca was suspicious. "I could tell." James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This is getting complicated. Maybe we should just tell them the truth," Lily suggested, stopping in front of him. "No," James said firmly, suddenly close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. "My grandfather would never forgive the deception. We have to stick to the plan. Kate's late-night visit had been innocent enough. She wanted to invite them on a morning horseback ride, but the interruption had changed something between James and Lily. The next day passed in a blur of family activities, both of them careful to maintain their act while keeping a new, careful distance from each other. By evening, Thomas Walker's birthday celebration was in full swing. The grand ballroom glowed with hundreds of candles, and a small orchestra played in the corner. Lily stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a midnight blue gown James had arranged for her. She felt like an imposter among the glittering guests, even with all her training. "You look lost," a gentle voice said beside her. She turned to find Thomas Walker watching her with wise eyes. "Just admiring everything," Lily replied, smiling. "It's all so beautiful." Thomas studied her face. "You're good for him, you know. I haven't seen James smile so much in years." Lily's heart squeezed painfully. If only the old man knew the truth. "He's good for me too," she said softly, surprised by how true the words felt. "Dance with an old man?" Thomas asked, offering his arm. Lily took it, letting him lead her slowly around the floor. Over his shoulder she spotted James watching them, something unreadable in his eyes. "My grandson has always kept people at a distance," Thomas said, following her gaze. "After his parents died, he built walls. I worried he'd never let anyone in." Lily didn't know how to respond, caught in the deception that suddenly felt cruel. "But the way he looks at you," Thomas continued, his voice warm, "that's real." Before Lily could process his words, the dance ended. Thomas bowed slightly, then gestured to someone behind her. Lily turned to find James standing there, hand extended. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally, though something in his eyes seemed different, vulnerable even. The orchestra began a slow waltz. James pulled her close, their bodies fitting together perfectly. His hand on her waist felt like it belonged there. "My grandfather likes you," he said, his voice low. "He's a good man," Lily replied. "He loves you very much." James's eyes met hers, holding her gaze. "I've been thinking about what happens after this weekend." Lily's heart sank. Of course. The weekend would end, she would get her payment, and they would go back to their separate lives. "I understand," she said stiffly. "We end the charade and I return to being your housekeeper." James frowned. "Is that what you want?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" He guided her to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from curious eyes. "I never expected this to feel so real." Lily finished when he hesitated. James nodded, his hand still holding hers. "I've dated many women, Lily. Sophisticated, well-connected women who fit perfectly into my world. But with you?" Lily held her breath, afraid to hope. "With you, I feel like myself," he admitted. "Not the businessman, not the grandson with something to prove. Just me." Lily's heart raced. "James, There you are." Rebecca's voice cut through the moment like a knife. She appeared beside them in a stunning red gown, her smile cold. "James, your grandfather is looking for you." Something about a toast. James' expression closed. "I'll be right there." He gave Lily's hand a gentle squeeze before walking away. Rebecca turned to Lily, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "You're not going to last, you know. Whatever hold you think you have on him, it's temporary. James always comes back to what he knows." Lily squared her shoulders. "You don't know him as well as you think." Rebecca laughed softly. "I know he likes to rescue people. It makes him feel good. But marriage? To someone like you? It won't last." Each word hit Lily like a physical blow because they echoed her own fears. Was that all this was to James? A rescue mission that had unexpectedly engaged his emotions. Across the room, James stood beside his grandfather, raising the champagne glass for a toast. His eyes found hers in the crowd, his gaze intense and searching. Lily felt tears threatening and turned away, needing air. She slipped out onto the terrace, the cool night air a relief after the warmth of the ballroom. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to human dramas playing out below them. "Lily?" James's voice came from behind her. The rest of the evening passed in a dreamlike state for Lily. After their moment on the terrace, she and James returned to the party. Something fundamentally changed between them. His hand rarely left hers, and the looks they exchanged were no longer practiced but genuine. What had begun as pretense had transformed into something neither had expected. As the party wound down, Lily found herself cornered by Rebecca once more, this time in the quiet of the library where she had gone to catch her breath. "Enjoying playing princess?" Rebecca asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Lily straightened her shoulders. "I'm not playing anything." Rebecca laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Please, I've known James for years. This sudden marriage is completely out of character for him. Something doesn't add up." "Perhaps you never really knew him," Lily suggested quietly. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "I made some calls. No one at the children's hospital has heard of you." Lily's blood ran cold. "I worked in administration. Not everyone would know me." "Really? Because Michael mentioned seeing you at James's office, wearing a uniform." Rebecca's smile was triumphant. "You're not his wife. You're his staff." The door opened before Lily could respond. James's sister Kate stood there, her expression curious. "Everything okay in here?" Rebecca's face transformed instantly into a pleasant mask. "Just girl talk," she said sweetly, brushing past Kate and out the door. Kate turned to Lily with concerned eyes. "Don't let Rebecca bother you. She's never gotten over James breaking up with her." Lily managed a smile, but inside panic bloomed. Rebecca knew, and she wouldn't keep quiet. Later that night, Lily paced their bedroom while James showered. When he emerged, wearing only pajama bottoms, she barely noticed his bare chest, too consumed with worry. "Rebecca knows," she blurted out. "She checked with the hospital. And Michael saw me in uniform at your office." James stopped, water still dripping from his hair. "What exactly did she say?" Lily recounted the conversation, her voice shaking slightly. "She's going to tell everyone, James. The whole charade will be exposed." James was quiet for a moment, then crossed the room to take her hands in his. "Let her." "What?" Lily looked up at him in confusion. "I said, let her." His eyes were calm, determined. "Maybe it's time for the truth." Lily pulled away, pacing again. "Your grandfather will be humiliated. He'll change his will like he threatened. Everything you were trying to prevent will happen." James caught her arm gently, stopping her. "Do you think I still care about that?" "You should," Lily insisted. "It's your inheritance, your family's approval." "And what about you?" James asked softly. "Do you think I don't care about losing you?" The words hung in the air between them. Lily's heart pounded. "James, we come from different worlds. Maybe Rebecca's right. Maybe you just like rescuing people." Anger flashed across his face. "Is that what you think? That this is charity? That what I feel for you isn't real?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Lily admitted, tears threatening. "A few weeks ago, I was cleaning your office. Now I'm sharing your bed, pretending to be your wife, and you're saying—" "I'm saying I love you," James interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Pretend wife, real wife, housekeeper. The title doesn't matter. I love you, Lily." The words hit her like a physical force. She stared at him, unable to speak. James continued, moving closer. "I know it's fast. I know it's complicated, but somewhere between all the lessons in pretending, I fell in love with you. And I hope, you might feel something for me too." "I do," Lily whispered, admission both terrifying and freeing. "But James, your world will adapt," he finished firmly. "Or it won't. But I'm not losing you because of what others might think." He pulled her into his arms and Lily went willingly, her head resting against his bare chest. She could hear his heart beating, strong and steady. "Tomorrow morning," he said, his voice rumbling under her ear, "we tell them the truth. Together." Lily looked up at him, seeing sincerity in his eyes. All of it. Morning arrived too quickly, sunlight streaming through the curtains they had forgotten to close. Lily woke first, momentarily disoriented by the weight of James's arm around her waist, the warmth of his body against her back. The events of the previous night came rushing back, his confession, their decision to tell the truth. She carefully turned to face him, taking a moment to study his sleeping face. Without the mask of the powerful businessman, he looked younger, more vulnerable. She reached out, gently touching his cheek, still not quite believing this was real. James's eyes fluttered open, a smile spreading across his face when he saw her. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," Lily replied softly. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Ready for today?" Before she could answer, a sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. James sat up, instantly alert. Yes. James, it's Rebecca. We need to talk. Now. The voice was cold, determined. James and Lily exchanged looks. She's moving faster than we expected, he muttered, climbing out of bed and grabbing a shirt. Just a minute, he called toward the door, then turned to Lily. Stay here. Let me handle this first. Lily nodded, though anxiety knotted her stomach. James squeezed her hand reassuringly before opening the door just enough to step through, closing it behind him. Left alone, Lily strained to hear their voices in the hallway. Though muffled, Rebecca's tone was clear, sharp, accusatory, triumphant. James' responses were too low to make out. Lily clutched the bedsheet, imagining the worst. Minutes later, the door opened again. James stood there, his expression unreadable. She's gathered everyone in the drawing room. She wants to make an announcement. Lily's heart sank. She's going to expose us. James nodded grimly. Get dressed. Whatever happens, we face it together, remember? 20 minutes later, they walked hand in hand toward the drawing room. James's grip was firm, steadying. Outside the door, he paused, looking down at her. Lily, no matter what happens in there, know that what I said last night was real. I love you. She stood on tiptoe to kiss him briefly. I love you too. They entered the room to find James's entire family gathered. His grandfather sat in his favorite armchair, looking confused. Kate stood nearby, concerned, and Rebecca stood in the center of the room, her red dress from the night before replaced with a crisp white suit, like a prosecutor ready to deliver a closing argument. Finally, Rebecca said, her smile sharp, "Now everyone's here." James stepped forward, still holding Lily's hand. "Rebecca, if you have something to say, say it." Rebecca's eyes gleamed with malice. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about your wife. She's not who she claims to be." A murmur ran through the family. Thomas Walker leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowed. Lily has never worked at any children's hospital, Rebecca continued, voice rising dramatically. She works for James, as his housekeeper. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to James and Lily. Before James could speak, Lily stepped forward. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. Yes, that's true. Another murmur, louder this time. I was a housekeeper at James's house, Lily continued, looking directly at Thomas. James hired me to pretend to be his wife for this weekend, to fulfill your expectation that he be married. Thomas's face darkened. James moved to stand beside Lily, supporting her. It started as a business arrangement, James added, his voice strong and clear. But something unexpected happened. He turned to look at Lily, his eyes softening. I fell in love with her. Not with the woman pretending to be my wife, but with the real Lily, intelligent, kind, strong. Rebecca laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. She tricked you, tricked all of us. No, James said firmly. The deception was my idea, and I'm sorry for it. He looked at his grandfather. I was wrong to lie to you. I was so focused on meeting your expectations that I couldn't see what really mattered. Thomas was silent, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. So there's your scandal, Rebecca, James finished, turning to his ex-girlfriend. You're right. Lily isn't who we said she was. She's better. Rebecca stared, speechless for once. Then Thomas Walker slowly rose from his chair, using his cane for support. The room held its breath as he approached James and Lily. Is it true? He asked Lily directly. You were hired for this charade? Yes, sir, Lily answered, meeting his eyes without shame. But falling in love with your grandson was never part of the agreement. Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then surprised everyone by chuckling softly. Well. It seems my grandson finally found someone who values honesty above appearances. He turned to James. I wanted you to find a partner who would help you become the man I always knew you could be. Someone real in this world of pretense. His weathered hand reached out, grasping Lily's. It seems you found her, just not in the way any of us expected. Relief washed over James's face. So you're not angry? Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. Oh, I'm furious about the deception, but I'm too old and too wise to stand in the way of real love when I see it. He looked between them, his expression softening. Now perhaps you two should start over, properly this time. 1 year later, Lily stood in the same ballroom, this time wearing a simple white gown. James waited for her at the end of the aisle, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. Thomas Walker sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him sat Lily's brother Tom, healthy and strong after his successful treatment. As James took her hands in his, he whispered words only she could hear. From pretend to forever. Who would have thought? Lily smiled, remembering the unlikely path that had brought them here. Sometimes, she whispered back, the most real things begin with a little pretending.